Well, what I often do on this podcast, of course, is talk to people not only from Saskatchewan, but kind of from the home turf. So there's another person joining me here today, Dr. Jacqueline Ottmann, who is the Vice Provost of Indigenous Engagement at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon. But the important thing is she grew up down the road, 3 miles, 3 kilometers somewhere.
Not too far.
Not too far. Welcome and thanks for being with us today. It's just great.
Thank you so much, Pamela. And it's always good to see you.
You are such an amazing success story. We're going to get into what you're doing at the university, but and I know your mom and I knew your dad, of course. He was chief at Fishing Lake First Nation. And you are just one of those shining lights where off you went. My sister and I were talking about it the other night, and she said everybody remembers Jacqueline when she graduated in a white buckskin dress, all beaded, that your family had made for you.
I've had very strong examples of leadership over the years, and that even extends beyond me. And I've heard stories of strong women in my family, and I'm the great-granddaughter of one of our hereditary chiefs. And so those stories I carry with me. And of course, my mom is still driving school bus, as we talked about. I think she's in her 48th year of driving school bus.
She also looks like she's 29, so I'm just going to say that. She's a beautiful woman.
We have good genetics that way, yes.
As do you.
Thank you.
No, she really is. And she's looking after children and grandchildren and working hard. And I see her at church, and there's just all of these. She's just very present.
She's very present in the community, definitely. Yeah. And for the students that enter her school bus, she says that they deserve the same care and discipline that she's given us over the years. So she really does see them as her own. And of course, my dad, as you mentioned, has passed away, but he was chief of our community, Fishing Lake First Nation, for a span of 30 years. Yep. And that's significant when you consider that up until recently, elections were every 2 years.
Yeah. So you have to keep getting reelected.
You have to keep on getting reelected. That's right.
Some people, and I don't know enough about the history, but there is a belief that Indigenous communities are actually quite matriarchal. Are they or aren't they?
We're matriarchal societies to a large degree, yes. So, and that changed with the imposition of the Indian Act and the application of electoral systems across the country. So with elections came the dissolution, the tearing apart of our traditional electoral systems. Well, not electoral systems, because we didn't have
power
those.
Structures in a way.
The governance structures, right. The leadership structures within our communities. Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about what happened the day after you wore that beautiful dress to your graduation. Then what?
Well, there's a story even to that white buckskin dress, and I was one of the very few Fishing Lake First Nation students to graduate from Wadena High School, and at that point, from grade 10 to grade 12, I was the only member of my community in the town high school.
That's what I remember. The girls I went to school with got through grade 9, sometimes grade 10, but then they disappeared.
That's right. And that was a very common story. And so it was important for me to to communicate a message that I was proud of who I was, that I didn't have to compromise my identity as an Anishinaabe person in order to graduate from high school, and also to communicate to people outside of my community that same message, that here I am wearing my traditional dress, and this is how we celebrate, right? And it's just as important for us to wear our regalia as it is to wear a graduation gown. And after that, I think that was the question you were asking.
Yes.
Is I was already enrolled at the University of Saskatchewan. So at the age of 17, I came to the University of Saskatchewan.
You're rare in that. And in fact, a lot of us from small towns didn't assume that we would go to university. I mean, I had a mother who was a teacher who instilled that in me from a very early age, but not everybody from rural Saskatchewan said, oh, I'll go to university. How did that even become part of your, I will do this?
I've had very supportive parents and grandparents. And so I was always encouraged, as were my brothers. I have 5 brothers, to excel within the schooling system, the provincial schooling system. And as it was seen as an avenue to a better quality of life, but also it was an avenue that that we could take in order to come back to support our community and our communities within Saskatchewan and beyond. So it was being adept in both worlds.
Yeah.
And being able to use both languages for the betterment of all.
Just having, I mean, sometimes you have to leave to come back, whether that's, not technically necessarily to the First Nation, but to come back to your home, your province. And I felt the same in my business. It was hard to be in the television business in Saskatchewan at that point. You needed to go to Toronto or somewhere else. So you went out with that intent that this would always be your cause. This would be your issue, to be a voice.
Definitely. And so I received my first degree from the University of Calgary. That was my Bachelor of Education degree. And then my husband and I, and eventually my children, we stayed in Calgary as I was teaching. And so I was an elementary and high school teacher for some years, and came back to the University of Saskatchewan for my graduate studies. So I did receive my MEd and my PhD from the University of Saskatchewan, and went back to Calgary as faculty at the University of Calgary. So I was there for 13 years before I stepped into this particular role.
Was that a first too?
It within that department it was. And so this also Vice Provost of Indigenous Engagement is also an inaugural position. So
when you go home, or I don't know, on the phone, what's your mom say about this?
For my mom, she's my greatest supporter. She prays for the work that I'm engaged in, and with all the travels that I do, and that's international up until COVID and the pandemic. I know that support is unconditional and it's always there.
What separates you, though? Have you figured that out? You were able to do what you did. You left. You've got a string of degrees behind your name. So many don't, coming out of exactly the same circumstances.
My journey has also been, I'll rephrase that. So I've also encountered challenges during this journey that are similar to the challenges that our Indigenous youth are experiencing today, and so for me, again, it was important that I had that inspiration, first of all, from specific members in my family. And also the encouragement of certain teachers along the way in elementary and in high school. And so it is so important to have that for our youth to be embraced in ways that affirms and validates who they are. And there are, and I understand the challenges that many of our youth continue to face. So there has to be, we have to provide them with that sense of hope and inspiration. And so I was given that over the years. And we have a very strong family network. And so I get texts from my aunties, good morning and wishing you a good day. And again, it's simple words of encouragement, and just knowing that I'm not alone, and that there were other Indigenous peoples that paved the way for me too. And so I've leaned into those people, and some of them have become my friends.
Right.
And so we share to some degree common experiences.
Family structure in so many conversations with successful people, and I'm using air quotes as I say that, but you are genuinely a successful person. So many of them cite family structure as being key. It's true in my own life. Without that supportive family, you wouldn't get from point A to point B and then on to C. That's hard to legislate. That's hard to say we need to make this change to give them the support. Education will be key to that, but can we fix that?
I think it'll take a little bit of time to, and we have to work collectively to ensure that our youth are supported in that way. So, and I've always felt that although I've had strong nuclear family support, I've also had strong support from my community. So, and never really felt that I was paving the way or being encouraged to do what I do solely by my parents. And
so there was a larger force.
There was a larger supportive network. And I think for our Indigenous youth today, we have to create that larger supportive network.
When you took on this job at the university, the Vice Provost Indigenous Engagement, what does that mean?
These are new positions within mainstream universities within the U15 across the country. And for many years, there were Indigenous and non-Indigenous advocates for representation at the most senior levels. And so that was exactly what happened at the University of Saskatchewan. And over the years, there have been amazing firsts for the university and amazing initiatives that were started and have been sustained over time. And so one of the recommendations was for this particular position. And from what I understand, there was planning off and on for about 10 years. And then came the planning for the search itself. And I was told that it began with a pipe ceremony. And then there was the executive search itself. And so again, just knowing that these are new positions and the responsibility that we have to these
You've got to try and invent it.
We've got to, we were in office startup mode we still are in a sense in office startup mode. I have a team. We're 9 people now. Whereas for the first 6 months, it was basically myself.
Yeah.
And so we built a team. We've made ourselves known within the university. We have a university-wide mandate to impact indigenization and reconciliation and decolonization.
Okay, those are phrases that everybody knows. So, but let's dig a little bit. So how in 5 years or in 2 years or 10, I don't know how long this will take, what will be different? What will you think is success, that I have made a difference? I've made real change here.
Yeah, and that's a question that I get asked quite frequently.
I'm sure.
Right? And I think it's an answer that we have to, or the answer we create together, we have to co-create. But for myself, I think one of the things that needs to change is the narrative in a lot of cases where historically or more recently, whenever we talk about indigenization or reconciliation, then the question is, why do we have to do this? Why do we have to mandate classes? Why do we have to, have a separate program? Or why are we engaging in systemic changes to recognize Indigenous scholarship? And so the narrative would change from why to what next, or how, right? So we're past that. We're past explaining the importance of indigenization and reconciliation.
So there are, I think I read about 3,000 Indigenous students at U of S. Is that?
Yes, we have about 3,400.
Okay.
And that's an approximation. And we also have, and those are self-declared.
Yeah, so there may be others.
There may be.
And they're spread across all faculties and all of. So is there something, they're integrated wherever they are, right? If they're in engineering, they're doing this, or if they're in medicine, they're doing that. Is that okay? Or do you want them to identify in a different way on how can you take that resource that's there, these 3,400 people, they're all there to get their education, do what they want to do. How do you pull something out of that fact to start to change it for others?
It's, I think, with the significant, not only student Indigenous population, but our faculty and staff population, we have, again, tremendous responsibility. And whenever you have a significant population, then you're moving towards certain tipping points, and engaging in conversations, deeper conversations about systemic change, structural change at the university, deeper change that's more supportive of our Indigenous students. And they are there to, as you mentioned, to gain a career. And during that time, in addition to hopefully also developing their leadership skills and encouraging them to exercise their voices, we want to ensure, again, that we provide that spaces that are safe, that are caring, and just encouraging them in ways to where we ensure that they complete those programs.
Is that an issue? Sort of having people see it through to the end? I mean, I don't know what it's going to mean with COVID and people doing virtual learning, because it's a very different experience for everybody if you don't have that campus life. So is that a particular challenge, or is it also an issue for Indigenous students?
You only have to investigate recent research and literature that are focused on the success of Indigenous students within post-secondary education. And this is not exclusive to Canada, but there are certain barriers that our Indigenous students encounter, not only within post-secondary education, but in schooling in general. And if we know what those barriers are, then we really have to act on them, right? And so barriers could include things like childcare, issues related to poverty, and certain supports, holistic supports, mental well-being supports. And we know that our Indigenous youth experience greater incidence of suicide. And of course, that is connected to mental wellness. And so we are working at providing those holistic supports for our students and ensuring that we are there for them versus the other way around, right? And where we don't overburden our students with the
responsibility to be
Exactly.
the role model and successful and stay. And
Exactly.
I can see the point.
The experts within their classrooms or within their department or within their college.
Because I mean, that's the other issue. When you think, I've got two nieces going through university, they're all, when you think of them leaving home, and we can remember our own experience too, it's pretty, this is a brave new world, right? And you're on your own and nobody cares whether you do your homework, and you have to be self-motivated, and all of those things that go on at university. And it's true for all kids, but you're saying there needs to be a different world for Indigenous kids to relate to while they're part of that larger one.
We want to create a strong sense of community for them. And at the University of Saskatchewan, we have the Gordon Oaks Red Bear Student Center.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a beautiful building. And within there is the Aboriginal Student Center. And so there are people that are there to support our Indigenous students if they encounter issues. And so we do our best to ensure that that we're there for them, or that we're providing or leading them in the right direction for supports.
In any institutional setting, a university or politics, it doesn't really matter. There's always that sense of not enough, not fast enough. You're not really making it different. The Truth and Reconciliation recommendations, and why wasn't everything implemented yesterday? You're walking that fine line, because there you are, an Indigenous woman, and people are saying, yes, go faster, give us more, give us more. And you understand the system you're in. It's how money is allocated, and it's all of these things. It's not just, there's no magic wand.
There isn't a magic wand. There isn't a magic bullet. And so this process, it took us, as Senator Murray Sinclair said, education got us into this mess, and education will get us out. And so, and it took generations of enforced residential schools to make significant impacts intergenerational impacts within our communities. And so now we're in this space of changing directions and starting to, as I mentioned earlier, systemically and structurally change our systems and systems that could be identified as colonial. Right. And so that takes time. It takes time. And as I mentioned earlier, it's taken us a lot of time to get to this particular space. And I'm glad people are impatient because I'm impatient also. And I've got a team, and we're going as fast as we can with the mandate that we have to support indigenization at the university. And so I understand the impatience, and we have an Indigenous strategy that will be launched, and it has been developed and informed by the Indigenous community. And that will provide a framework for the university to engage in deeper forms of indigenization.
How does the structure of a university have to change to accomplish that? I mean, it's not just individuals standing at a classroom saying the right things. I mean, when you say indigenization, give me an example of what that would be.
I'll explain or define, first of all, that in relation to the University Plan 2025, that's the university foundational strategy, indigenization is defined as uplifting Indigenous peoples, their histories, their knowledges, their traditions, their languages. And decolonization is more of that challenging force, the force that challenges demeaning and divisive policies or programming or initiatives. And then both of those, from my perspective, will lead us into deeper forms of reconciliation. And so with indigenization, we're uplifting Indigenous peoples, traditions, languages. And so one way of doing that would be ensuring that our curriculum has Indigenous content that is Indigenous informed.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be uplifting Indigenous peoples. Decolonization would be something like, well, go back to indigenization. One of the things that we're working on right now are the university standards for promotion and tenure.
Okay.
And
I see.
And so historically, it's been challenging for Indigenous faculty who it's been challenging for Indigenous faculty to move through that promotion system and to engage in tenure based on how they see Indigenous scholarship. And so
you mean the standards by which they're judged are different, and they're saying, yeah, but in my world, this is okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So basically, the way that the standards look right now are not inclusive of Indigenous methodologies, and they're just as rigorous.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, I can even say perhaps even more rigorous than the standards that are there. And there's different standards again for pedagogy, and how we teach the art and science of teaching in the classroom or on the land. And so none of that is recognized within the current university standards. However, we have been working with we worked with a group of Indigenous scholars. And so we did an external scan, an internal scan of what's happening in this area. And so with that particular group, they also created and amended changed and amended the current university standards to be inclusive of Indigenous scholarship. That is monumental.
Yeah, that's a very big step. What do we do with the day-to-day stuff that goes on where we see statues of Sir John A. Macdonald being ripped down? It's a part of our history. It was a point in time. Is it a teachable moment? Should we just be talking about what was said, what was done at that time? Do the statues have to come down? Or those things, when you think about an academic approach to understanding history and the history of colonization and all of that, I'm at a loss. What do you think?
Yes, it is a complex issue to some degree, and there are so many different perspectives on how we address some of these challenges. And I know that I have a friend who is a vice principal in Métis of a junior high school, and so Sir John A. Macdonald was one of those prominent people that was evident within that junior high. And so what she did is she had the whole school engage in learning and, who was Sir John A. Macdonald,
Mm-hmm.
and what was his platform, what was his policies, what were his policies, and what about his relationship with Indigenous peoples? And so, it's important to, again, encourage people to be critical thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
And be courageous enough to ask questions that perhaps weren't asked 10 years ago, right? And also to co-create, again, some of those solutions in relation to some of those questions related to the statues.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm just providing context is not condoning the behavior.
It's not condoning the behavior. It's not. And so over the years, if I have taught a class on that included Indigenous histories and the contributions of Indigenous peoples after the foundation of Canada. They're with students that have never heard that history, it causes, in a sense, cognitive dissonance for many of them. It's like, I've never heard this before. And why was it not in my elementary or high school teachings? And why is it I'm hearing this for the first time at university? And, you know, with that new learning, they're taking it home to their parents or to their friends. And then they encounter some of those perhaps racist belief systems. And so all of a sudden they are aware, and with knowledge comes responsibility. And they start to see that some of the messaging about Indigenous peoples is false.
So you're still putting it, he was the country's first prime minister, and this was the time and place, but you need to understand what he believed, what he said, what he did. But it was a different time than it is in 2020.
It was definitely a different time. And I think as leaders, we have to be mindful of the impact that we have on our decisions, the impact that we have not only on our families, our societies today, but the impact on future generations. And you have someone like Sir John A. Macdonald and other people in history that enforced the Indian Act of 1876, and that had powerfully negative impacts on all Indigenous peoples in Canada for generations. And so when you take away the voice of the agency of peoples, then what is there left? And so I think those stories are important because it has us consider our own actions, and it has us think about perhaps our own belief systems and our value systems, and if we need to challenge them, then we do that internal work.
In your own life, would you say there's been great progress, some progress, none at all? It's just a different time? Like, how do you see it?
One of the stories that I share on campus, especially with our new Indigenous students, is my first steps at the University of Saskatchewan when I first stepped onto campus. And that was in 1983. And at that time, if I saw another Indigenous person, it was such a big deal in my day-to-day life, right? So there were very few Indigenous peoples on campus.
Did you reach out? Did you feel like you had to go and say hello, or was it just knowing there was someone else?
It was both. There were times I did reach out, and then there were times that I would see someone, and that would have been the only time that I would have ever seen them. And so there was that deep sense of loneliness those first few years, and so now we have a concentration of Indigenous students, and I understand those particular feelings of leaving home, and so now we have an office at this particular university that could help impact the lives of our Indigenous students. And so in that respect, there has been improvement, and there are other universities across the country that are either considering a senior level position in Indigenous engagement, or they have senior level positions, and that I think is something that we have to recognize is as there is that possibility of great impact over our university. And of course, our students that graduate, they have their own circle of influences, right? And so my message is always to say that I'm here, but perhaps one of you will become the president of the University of Saskatchewan, right? And so being visible is really important. Being approachable is very important. And we all have our role in that.
So what would Dr. Jacqueline Ottmann, Vice Provost of Indigenous Affairs at University of Saskatchewan, tell the girl in her white dress?
That's a good question. And that's a really good question. That is a good question because one of the things that my dad told me, and I had, my mom just turned 17 when I was born. So I had a teenage mother. And then when I turned 17, I was on my way to university. And my daughter, when she was 17, she was planning a trip to Europe, a backpacking trip to Europe on her own. And so for that girl in the white regalia, I think she always knew that there is promise. And even though that at the time, and there were times when it was hard to grab hold of that hope and that promise, and I would, as I've been told over the years, just to lean and start growing into my name, which is Mizuweka Megokpe Motang, and to continue believing in herself, and believing that she is not alone, and that there is a large community that believe in her, and draw their hope from her.
So lovely to hear that, and lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jacqueline.